preseason, right? We'll go over what all the actual techniques are when we start up at 6:30, but I'll show you some of the ways if somebody will corner me somewhere and say, you know, how do I troubleshoot my website? I'll show you just the typical approach that I'll take. So I usually use Fiddler. And so, you know, if you can see everything okay. So I'm going to clear this and do that again. And I'm just looking for some particular things here. So let's start with the actual HTML. So the first thing I do is look at stats. So you're killing it from a statistic standpoint. So you're not going to be all that great to find obvious things because most web pages are about 75 requests and about 3 meg. So the fact that you have 6 requests and only 30K is amazing. If we take a look at, next thing I'll look for is just some of the standard techniques we'll talk about, like caching. So I see that you're not setting any expirations. So when we get to the expirations part, you can take a look at that. But the idea being you can specify to browsers how long you want them to keep that current. Because if you don't specify that, you're leaving it up to the browser to decide on a subsequent visit whether they have to come back and re-download the stuff they already downloaded. So that would be something to look at when we get to expirations. You can see how that's going to look. Next thing I'll check out is your CSS here. So I typically will go into inspectors. And the good thing is you're using compression. So if you can see this kind of yellow bar. So you're down to 3K. And if we were to take that off, it'd be about 13. So that's pretty typical. I mean, you're saving, you know, what, 75% or so just by turning compression on. So we'll talk about that. So I'm glad that you're doing that correctly. I'm going to take that off just so I can see the actual CSS. So the next thing I'd recommend is minification. So take it with a grain of salt because your stuff is so small already. But there's still techniques that I would do because they're easy and they're good wins. But you can run a minification tool on this. And again, you'd probably cut down from that 3K down more in like the 1K range or so. It's just going to strip out all of the new lines, and you don't have a lot of comments in here, but it's not unusual with frameworks to have a lot of comments in the CSS. That doing the minification will take that out.
It was all written by hand, so
okay.
I didn't need much comment.
Yep. So when you build, you could look at doing a minification tool for that. Again, we'll just cut off some of that size. I see you've got another CSS file here. Again, you're using gzip, so that's good. I'm going to take that off so I can look at this one. So I'm not sure why the 2 different files, you know, why they're separated out.
Oh,
if there's an advantage to that.
That one, the CSS menu is just
from a
my
package
menu bar.
Oh, okay. We see your geek is a GIF, so I want to look at the image view for that. So that's probably okay. I guess today I would lean more towards probably SVG for that. The advantage, if you're going to do any responsive design and you want it to look good on phones and tablets and such, by making it an SVG, it will be vector graphics instead of bitmaps. So somebody who blows it up on a large screen, the nice thing is you don't have to use, we'll talk about source set and picture and other techniques to get various sizes of that image. And you'll probably get it to be a smaller size. Again, you got a couple PNGs here. I'm going to turn on image bloat. So this is a Fiddler extension that will tell me if you have metadata in your images. So you can see on this one up top, about, I got to squint to see that, about 15% of that image is actually metadata. So it's got things about like your shutter speed and all that kind of stuff. That's easy to strip out with a tool like JPEG Train. So you would cut about 15% of that size just by taking the metadata out, which can be handy. There was a drug lord in South America who decided to grant an interview. He never does interviews.
Mhm.
And he did an interview in the jungle and had, like, you know, the palm leaves behind him, so he figured nobody could figure out where he was. The photographer took a picture and it had the geolocation stuff in it. They didn't strip out the metadata. So when they posted it, they had the lat long from where the picture was taken.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm sure that that's not going to be a problem for you, but from a performance standpoint, you want to take that stuff out if you can.
Yeah.
Let's go back to this. So that just shows which images have that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't see a whole lot. I'm going to run one other test. So we'll look at this tool too. I just want to check out some of the only other note I'll make, good, you're using HTTPS.
Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. Don't want to not do that. I didn't notice if on your response, you can use HSTS. So HSTS, what's it? I gotta remember. Strict Transport Protocol.
Yeah.
You can specify on that. So I didn't do a redirect on yours. I didn't try typing HTTP, but if I did, do you do a redirect?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I need to.
So you can specify here to do, you can tell browsers with that strict header, and if I have time, I'll talk about it during the talk.
Yeah.
You can tell them to never come back using HTTP. So if people accidentally leave off the HTTPS, your browser, the first time they visit and you send that, for however long you configure, they will only come back with HTTPS, which is great from a security standpoint.
I like that.
Yeah, and you avoid the redirect if you needed to do a redirect. The only other thing I'd notice, not really a perf thing, but I would strip this header. If you see this powered by ASP.NET and this IIS, only because hackers love you, right? It shortcuts their attack. So depending on how you've got this hosted, one of those is configurable, and they may both be now. I think they're both in IIS in the set common headers. But if you rip those out, it just makes more work for the hackers because they don't know automatically that you're using IIS and ASP.NET. So they have to work a little harder to find things that could be a flaw. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the other one I'll look at, I'm going to just copy this into here. So you're doing a lot of them, which is good. This tool will check you out from, it looks like Virginia. And I'm using this because it'll tell me a couple more things about how you're actually serving the pages. That's interesting. So we talked about the caching already. I get this same score. You'll see that on mine. So there's some security headers that you could probably be using. But I'm curious, what I'm looking for is this waterfall view. And if I look at the connection view, it looks like you must be using HTTP2. So I'm going to go verify that up here. Good. Yeah, you're using HTTP2. The reason I cared is because you were serving all of your stuff from your own domain. And in the olden days, you only had 6 connections per browser. And so eventually, again, you don't have a ton of files, but eventually you'd start stacking up and blocking on your own connections. But because you're using HTTP2, if I look at this connection view, you can see it's pulling all of your stuff from that one connection. So it doesn't have to reestablish, because if you look at the connection, every time you do a connection, it has to do DNS, the TCP handshake, the TLS handshake, and then it starts to do stuff and it starts slow. So it's good that you're using HTTP2. We'll talk about that. So that's good. And then you're just pulling from, for you, I think I would self-host your fonts. Do you see how you're pulling from? Yeah. Google is notorious for needing to pull those fonts. So they actually use those 3 different domain names. And you can see it takes a while to spin up those connections. If you self-hosted those, especially, and you can do that legally with the Google.
And I know how to do that.
Okay, I would do that just because it'll collapse those 3 and pull them up into this main connection. So you won't, because I think you're probably not painting until you're out here. And I think if you had them self-hosted, the browser's going to pull them before some of the images and maybe pull in your start rendering time. Does that make sense?
Sure.
But yeah, I'd say a couple things to do there, but your page is a lot smaller than most, so.
You want to know what my editor was?
What I would guess, I wonder if it embedded it in it. Because you're doing ASP.NET Visual Studio Code.
No, I programmed, it reads a spreadsheet and VBA builds the pages.
Cool. I was going to see what you had in here. Yeah, right there. VBA programming.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I don't know. Are there any others? Yeah, no problem. Are there anybody else want to volunteer? I got to get back to my main connection here. Anybody else have one they want to look at while we're waiting?
Just to clarify, we have not really started the actual presentation yet. Robert's just giving some free reviews of some sites. So if you have a site you'd like for him to take a look at, share it in the chat. We got a little bit more time.
And if you notice this cool feature, Windows Sandbox, I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but I always run anytime I'm connecting to any site I haven't been to before, Windows 10 has Windows Sandbox built in. So think of it as a throwaway virtual machine that keeps me isolated from malware and such. So if you haven't used that before, I just pop into Sandbox whenever I'm doing searches and stuff, because when I close it, it'll throw away all the stuff. So
I think that might be the coolest tip I've ever heard. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's I don't remember what build it came in, 18 something for Windows 10. And my only beef with it right now is it still has the old version of Edge. So I'm expecting with 21 H1 that hopefully it'll have the new Edge in it, because literally every time you start it, you have nothing installed. So I had gone and pre-installed Fiddler. That's the bad part, right? I mean, every time I start it, I have to put the tools I want on it, as opposed to a regular virtual machine. But at least everything I do in there, it's better than people think incognito and in private is protecting them from malware and such, and it's really not. I mean, the Sandbox is a nice, easy to use, not a full virtual machine that just automatically gets thrown away. So it's kind of cool.
So what if you hit a site like Boeing.com and look at it from your perspective?
Like the externally facing public one?
Yes. It's
Sure.
just www.boeing.com.
I gotta spell it right. Uh-oh. So the red, I forgot to turn off image bloat, but that'll be a good. You can see it's got all of these images have metadata. And so it just puts these bricks just to show you what percent. So again, if I were to download and save this image and go into details, it has like shutter speed, all that kind of stuff that doesn't add anything to your visual quality.
Which tool is this? Is this Fiddler? This is a Fiddler.
Yeah, this is Fiddler. Yep.
Gosh, I got to read the documentation on Fiddler again. Jeebus.
Yeah, so there's an extension inside of that you can download for Fiddler, and it's just called Show Image Bloat. And so I just use it as one of those checks to see, like this one's a good example. More than half of that image size is metadata. And so by cutting it out, you're guaranteed not to lose any visual quality, but all of the shutter speed and stuff that nobody cares about, right, will be gone. So this should download in half the time.
I mean, I have done some content for Boeing.com before, and it's just always painfully slow. I never knew why, but I guess now I do.
And then if I look in here, I'm going to turn that off just because I don't like looking at this view when I'm trying to go through, and I can see I'm not in the sandbox, but I'm going to trust your Boeing here. The other thing that would jump out at me is not secure. I mean, that's this day and age, I used to joke, grandma's quilting site didn't need to use HTTPS years ago, but now even that does.
Yeah.
There's too many people tampering in between that absolutely have to get that to HTTPS, because from a customer perspective, that scares people, right? You don't want
so
that
I
bitch.
think it's that way still, because there are countries that we allow to access the site that can't actually get to things with HTTPS.
Okay.
Like
I would look if
the
it
one
were
that
me.
starts with C and ends in INA.
Your other option is you might want to do like geolocated IP addresses and redirect everybody else, because you want the rest of the people not to suffer, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
and only redirect those that aren't. But I would say that's pretty critical, because if you don't use HTTPS, you can't use HTTP2. It's
Right.
just a limitation of not being able to do that. All right, so if we start digging into some of these, typically I would sort by body size and just start taking a look at some of these. I would presume these are images. Yeah, so if I take a look at what that is, and I'd have to go back to see how big it is on the page here, that's pretty big. That still seems like a pretty large size. I'll talk about JPEG compression when we go through the talk and some of the tools to do that, but I would think you could knock down. It's not horrible. I mean, I was helping somebody do this last week, and they had like a 3.8 meg banner image, which is pretty atrocious for a size. 300 isn't horrible, but I'll show you in the talk where you could make probably cut that in half, these bigger ones, without losing any quality. The other thing I like is the statistics. So you got about 42 requests, which isn't bad. You're about 1.9 meg. So certainly nothing jumps out at me there that's scary. It does have a chart here, so I can take a quick look at your breakdown of size. So it's mostly your JPEG images that are, and that's pretty typical. Most web pages are about 60% images. So that's not too bad. But again, I'll show you when we go through the talk. I would look at those, because I think you could get some wins off of those to be able to make those smaller.
It's so very different. The external facing website for Boeing looks so completely different from anything you see on the inside.
Okay.
The inside is typically laden with very little. There's not a lot of big JPEGs or anything. Most of it's content and text.
And the other thing with this, I would have to look at the actual source, but it looks like you're probably using source set and stuff by the fact that you've got widths and heights embedded in there. So it's probably, and I honestly am on a screen where that's probably the appropriate. So I'm just going to go spot check that. Oh, you're doing a straight up image. So when we talk about responsive images, if I were on a phone, I'm going to pull that same image. There's now a thing called source set that we'll get into that lets you specify various width images. So the browser will pick the smartest one. Because if I were down to a phone, I can emulate a phone. If I were on a phone, it's probably still pulling, because of the way you have that image tag. I keep saying you, right? You didn't write it probably, but the fact that it just has a source, you're probably pulling so you're probably pulling the best size, the biggest, best quality, which on a phone is going to hurt them from a download speed perspective. So when we get into responsive images, look at source set as an option for that, because you'll see the size differences we'll talk about when we get to that. And it looks like you're using minified, which is good. I just want to check if you're doing, okay, it's not compressed. So if you notice that minimum, so you did a minified CSS. If you did even gzip compression, you'd pull that from 175 down to about 28K. So I would definitely do that. I mean, on all of these, if I were to do that across the board.
Okay, here it comes. Gzip is not an approved product within Boeing.
What?
Yes.
It is in the rest of the world. How about Brotli? Brotli's even better. Deflate. I mean, the two common ones today are Deflate and gzip. But I mean, that's something just built into the web server, so you don't have to have a separate product, but they seriously won't let you turn that on?
No, getting a tool approved within Boeing is a year-long process.
Okay, well, show them the recording and show them that just turning that on, they get from 175 down to 28. I mean, I think their perf numbers will change dramatically if they let you turn that on. And then it's pretty standard practice as far as no real fear about having any issues with it as far as browser support and such, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Looks like you're using a font. Again, you're pulling that from your own, so that's good. So you're self-hosting all of those. Using WAF, they probably, I don't know, I'd have to look at the source again. WAF 2 will be smaller, and the browser I'm using right now should support WAF 2. And so I think if you went and hosted both of those and gave those as choices, my browser would pick the smaller one. So you might just want to look at the ability to do that with WAF 2. Because you're not using HTTP or HTTPS, you can't use HTTP2. So you might benefit by bundling. So this will be a good example to do in web page test. I can do it in Fiddler as well in a timeline, but I wanted to check something else in here anyways. Oops, that's not what I was hoping for. Oh, really? Help me if I miss it there. So I'm going to show you that waterfall effect or the ladder effect of not being able to use HTTP2.
Do you perform this analysis on each page? So like if this is just the home page, it doesn't include the whole website.
Yeah, so typically if I do this for people, most of the techniques you're going to use, they're missing everywhere. Like if you turn on compression, you're just going to benefit everywhere. And they usually pull the same JavaScript files and such. So typically you fix it on the home page. Now, in the conference one, their homepage looked pretty good, relatively speaking. Went to the speaker page, and that's where the image bloat showed up because every speaker contributed their own JPEG files, and most of them didn't take their metadata out. And so it does pay to do this on more than one page, but
there's probably 300 people working on Boeing.com. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So here you can see how it's got like kind of a ladder effect. It'll do 6 things at a time from the Boeing domain. And if I go down and pull from the connections down here, you'll see it used the 6 connections. But if you used HTTP2, they'd all pull from one, and you wouldn't have this startup time for every connection. And you don't get this kind of ladder effect where it'll do 6 at a time and then kind of 6 at a time and then another 6. That's because it gets stuck on its own connections while it's waiting. HTTP2 will multiplex that a lot better, if that makes sense.
Yes. They're going to demo this tool later again, right?
Yes, I'll go over all this again.
Okay.
So because you're doing HTTP 1.1, we used to bundle all of our JavaScript files together into a single file to reduce that contention for the connection. And by doing that, we cut our homepage time in half. So if you're not going to use HTTP2, that would be a good thing for you to look at, is just bundle these together because they would pull down, it would be better connection management. That makes sense. So those are the major things I think I would go, and I see we're getting within somewhat close to wanting to start. So I don't know if you want to give your warning message again. We haven't started yet, right? Just kind of reviewing sites as we're killing time here waiting.
That was pretty interesting. I was expecting it to be much worse, actually.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the statistics were pretty good. You're pretty well in line. Like I said, you're a perfect candidate to convince them you need to do compression, because that alone would be a pretty major win. JavaScript and CSS, you'll probably cut 75, 80% of your size. So I didn't look at the thing I like to look at in here. We'll talk about our measurements. It takes about 7.5 seconds to paint most of your page. I think if you did your compression and knocked those JPEGs down, you'd be substantially better than that. Let me go back here. And if you need to convince people internally, I like to use the video feature here, because you can show them this is what customers are looking at while they're waiting for your stuff to paint, right? So I do a before and after. Maybe you can do this. I will usually do a view source. I save off the source for this home page on my own Azure. I'll run web page test against it, get a score, and get the video. Then I'll tweak stuff over on my Azure that they won't let me do internally in the company yet. And then I would run web page test again and show them all you did was turn on gzip and did a couple of the other things. It's easy to do typically, and then show them the before and after. And that's usually a lot more, especially with higher ups, showing them what took 8.4, and then you show them stuff that takes 3.
Well, that's the problem. It's not the higher ups you have to show. It's the lower downs that know less than you do, but they're in charge of stuff.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
A little bit of power goes a long way over there.
Okay. Every company has their different dynamics, don't they?
Yes, we do.
So I don't know, do you want me to back up now so we can get ready? Do you have any intro stuff? Is that pretty good? Does that make sense so far? And then hopefully when we go through the talk, there'll be some other things you can pick up on. But
yes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording
okay.
right now.